Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Nicole Lamberson. I was trained as a physician assistant, and I volunteer doing outreach for the film Medicating Normal, and I host conversations like this one today. Our guest today is Peter, is it Eliasberg or Eliasberg?
It's Eliasberg.
Eliasberg, okay. Peter Eliasberg. He is a civil rights lawyer who lives in Los Angeles. Before going to law school, he worked as a freelance photographer, and before that, he coached rowing. His life was upended for 4.5 years after he got off an antidepressant way too quickly. The harmful effects of withdrawal were exacerbated by his being prescribed a benzodiazepine that he was advised would help with horrific insomnia, which was one of the symptoms of antidepressant withdrawal. So, hi, Peter. Thanks so much for joining us today and for, coming on and being willing to share your story with our audience.
Hi, Nicole. Happy to do it.
Yeah. So I guess I want to start with, first of all, we have this film, Medicating Normal, and have you seen it? How did you hear about it? And there's some back history there. You happen to know personally the filmmaker. So maybe we'll start with that.
Sure. I have seen the movie. I saw it not too long after it was released. I think probably in 2018 or maybe early 2019. And it's kind of an odd coincidence. Lynn, one of the directors of the film, Lynn Piasecki, was at high school. I went to high school with her and also college with her. But we were friendly. We had lost touch. And I was going through, which I know we'll go into detail about this, a horrific withdrawal from an antidepressant. And I happened to be talking to a friend, and my friend said, "Oh my God, Lynn." This was a college friend of mine. Lynn's actually making a movie about this very issue. And so he gave me Lynn's contact information. I reached back out to her. And she said, "Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening to you. I'm so sorry. And yes, I am making a movie about this. And in fact, I'm screening it in Los Angeles in a couple of weeks." So I went to a screening party for it, and saw Lynn again. As I said, we had lost touch. I saw the movie. I was very moved by it. And I was in the throes of hell as I watched the movie, and could very much identify with the experiences of the people in the movie. And then Lynn and I have stayed in touch really since. And I'm very glad to be supporting the movie in my own way now.
Yeah. It's kind of telling, isn't it, that it's like that sort of small of a world that, I notice when I tell my story, it's always somebody, who's like, "Oh, that happened to me," or "I know somebody," or "my neighbor," or I think it's a way bigger problem than, most people actually believe when you start realizing you can just tell your story and somebody in the room sort of says like, "Oh yeah,
Oh yeah. I've
Yeah.
absolutely had a number of those where I'll tell somebody and they'll say, "Oh, you should talk to my friend. She went through it," or "She knows somebody who's going through it." So yeah, I think it is a much bigger problem.
Yeah.
I think it's probably bigger than a lot of people know, because I think a lot of people don't even know that they have that problem.
Yeah.
They're told, "Oh, what, you get off your antidepressant and then you fall into this deep, deep black hole," and you're told, "Well, that's just your depression coming back." And you think to yourself, "No, I don't think so. I think it's much worse than that." But if you don't have the information, you don't have this validation that there is this whole issue of antidepressant withdrawal or benzo withdrawal that magnifies maybe 100-fold conditions that you might have experienced in your own life before. And then you're just told, "Oh no, that's just your depression coming back." No, it's not. But if you don't find a movie like Medicating Normal or talk to somebody, you may believe that that's the case because you don't have the information to tell you differently.
Yeah, so true. So let's jump into your story. I guess we'll start at the beginning, which is why you were prescribed an antidepressant in the first place, when you were prescribed, how long you took it, did it help, that kind of the beginning phase.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a history of depression in my family. My grandmother on my mother's side was bipolar. To the point where there were times when she became basically catatonic. I mean, completely non-functional. I think my mother suffered from depression, although she wasn't very open about her life experience, so she wouldn't say that, but I think that that's the case. And I dealt with levels of depression that I would probably call moderate, on and off through from, I think, pretty early age. And then in the 80s, when sort of the antidepressants became much more popular, they've existed, I think, since the 40s or 50s, but since Prozac and so on came out, I was struggling after I'd left law school and felt very unmoored and was having a difficult time. Was very functional, but having a difficult time. And somebody I knew and liked a lot suggested, "Oh, you should talk to this doctor. I know he's great." And so I spoke with him, and we talked for a long time. And he said, "Well, I think maybe an antidepressant would help you." And I actually took Prozac for a little while, and I did find, honestly, Nicole, it did help elevate my mood. But I stopped taking it because I found it sort of deadening. It helped prevent me from sinking below a certain floor, but it also felt very deadening. And there were a whole bunch of other side effects that I didn't like. And so I didn't stay with it. And I stopped. And honestly, I stopped. I don't even remember how I stopped. And luckily, I didn't suffer the kind of major crash that I later experienced. Maybe because I didn't take it for that long. I'm not sure why. But then about a year later, I was back down in a, I would say, a moderately dark place. And I thought, well, that antidepressant worked, but there were some problems with it. And I went to see another doctor, and he said, well, there were these other antidepressants, and this one doesn't seem to have the same kind of deadening effect that Prozac seemed to have. And he said, why don't you try it? It's Effexor. And so I started taking it. And again, I think it did help my mood. Not a ton, but it did help it. And then what happened was, which I think probably happens to a lot of people, you just keep taking it. And I got my mental health care through an HMO, which basically is a pill factory for mental, they don't do therapy really. And you have these short appointments with a psychiatrist. How are you doing? Well, I'm doing okay. And, then they rewrite the script for you. And I tried a couple of times to get off, and I didn't know at the time that Effexor is an unbelievably difficult drug to get off. And every time I tried to get off it, I would go too fast. I think I now know in hindsight, and I would just kind of crash. And I would think, well, I guess I'm just a really miserable, depressed person. And so I need to stay on this drug. And so I did, and I ended up staying on it, Nicole, for more than 20 years, I think 22 years. And I probably tried 2 times to get off. And then I'd say in the last couple of years I took it, I think it was losing its effectiveness, the benefits that it was giving me. And I said, I think there were some benefits. I think there were also some downsides. I think it has the effect of both setting a floor for your mood, but also putting a ceiling on your mood. I think I lived in a world, very sort of circumscribed world, where it was very hard for me to get a lot of joy and pleasure, but I also didn't sort of feel like I couldn't cope. So, but I think it stopped working, and I noticed that I was starting to get early morning insomnia. Not terrible, but I started not waking up a little earlier, waking up with some anxiety. I think, again, in hindsight, I think the drug had stopped working. And in fact, at one point near the end, I actually upped the dosage a little bit. That kind of gave me a little bit of a bounce, and then that quickly wore off. And then I had a lot of conversations with my wife, and she said, look, are you really comfortable? This drug doesn't seem to be helping you anymore. And are you really comfortable with the idea that you're going to spend the rest of your life taking a medication? Are you really sure it's safe? Do we really know it's healthy to do that? And I thought, well, that's actually a good, she had some good thoughts. And also my life was better. I was happily married. I was a father, I was more set in my career. And I thought, maybe this is the right time to really get off.
Yeah.
But again, I didn't get good advice, and didn't know and hadn't talked to the kind of people who said, the way to get off these drugs safely is to taper very, very slowly. So the psychiatrist at my HMO who was prescribing it said, oh, cut it every couple of weeks and you can get off in 6 weeks. And I thought, yeah, it feels a little fast. I want to do it in more like 10 to 12 weeks. And that's what I did.
Yeah.
And I just sort of cut the dosage every week or every other week until I was down. I wasn't taking a super large dose. I mean, I think people take as much as 300 milligrams of Effexor. I was taking about 60. It's 57.5 because of the way the pills are designed. I was taking a pill and a half. And I actually didn't have a hard time getting off, but a week after I got off, I crashed in the most profound way. I couldn't sleep. I was sleeping 2 hours a night from what had been maybe six. I was having crying jags. I was feeling like the world was just the blackest, darkest, most awful place. I was terrified, and I didn't know what was happening to me, except I thought, again, I had that thought, maybe I'm just a really, really depressed person who
Mhm.
absolutely has to take these drugs. But I kind of had committed to my own mind. I want to see if I can get through this and see if I actually can live without the medication. So
Mhm.
that was how I ended up getting off.
I'm
But
just
it was
curious,
awful. It was
when you
awful.
were, yeah, when you were coming down in dose, you said you wanted to take 12 weeks. Was there any, like, how did you divide it over 12, like with the pill form that you had? Did you just cut
I
it
think
up?
at the HMO they give you the pill cutter, and I think I
Mhm.
basically, there's a score in the middle of the pill, so you can easily cut it in half, and then I think you can sort of reasonably accurately cut it in quarters. So I think I don't remember the exact progression, Nicole, but it was basically started at 57.5, then went down, went down, went down. At the end, I remember I was taking 18.75, which is like half of 137.5 pill, and then I went down to zero. And
Yeah.
as I said, about 5 to 7 days later, I just completely crashed. And in fact, I still remember this vividly. My wife and I and my son we're going to take a trip, and we
Mhm.
were in New York prepared to sort of embark on this journey. And I felt like I was dying. And she walked up to me and she said, "Are you okay?" She's very intuitive and she can read my moods. And I said, "No, I feel like I'm dying." I really thought that I just like my world was ending. Uh,
Yeah.
and it was crushing.
So did you have any sense then at that point that you were in withdrawal, like compared to what you had taken it for, on a scale of 1 to 10, the feeling that you had then versus once you came off a week later on a scale of 1 to 10, like how did they compare really?
Well, if you want to sort of rank what my depressions had been at times, I would say, they were fives.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that eventually led me to realize that this was withdrawal and not some sort of natural state.
Mhm.
Even when I was younger and went through phases of depression, I was always incredibly motivated. So I tried out for a national team in a sport. I went through rigorous academic programs and always did very, very well in them, and got the job that I really wanted to get after I graduated from law school. So I always had drive. I didn't have a lot of joy in my life, and there would be sort of feelings of darkness about the world, but I had drive and motivation. When this happened, I could barely function, and I had no desire to do anything. And so I would say that if my depression before getting on antidepressants was a 5, this was a 15. I mean, it was just so much worse by orders of magnitude. But
Mhm.
again, initially I just thought, well, God, maybe I don't remember the past right, or maybe as you get older, depression gets worse or something. But what happened, Nicole, was that about a month after I got off and I was just dying, my wife did some internet research, and I don't remember what she found, but she
Mhm.
found something about effexor withdrawal. And she came to me and she said, "I don't think you're just depressed. I think you're dealing with this." And
Mhm.
she sent me this article about effexor withdrawal. And I read it and I thought, oh my God, that's what's happening.
Yeah.
This is not just who I am. This is the effects of being on a medication for years and then getting off it. As I said, I mean, I had suicidal ideation. The world just seemed totally black. I had no motivation. I couldn't sleep. I had crying jags. I'm not a super emotional guy. I'm capable of crying, but I was bursting into tears uncontrollably.
Yeah.
And when you read something like that, you don't feel better, but at least you think, oh, wait a minute here. Maybe I at least know the cause of this. And so that
Yeah.
was sort of a key moment to have that realization that maybe this isn't just who I am. This is the effect of damage that's happened from being on and then coming off of medication.
Right. So I'm just curious if when you were prescribed the drug in the first place, or even when you were given these, too rapid instructions from your HMO doctor to come off, was there any warning whatsoever that you could have a physical dependence or withdrawal syndrome from the drugs?
Never.
Yeah.
Nobody ever said, be careful about these medications, or when you take them, you should be aware that there are pluses and minuses, there are benefits, but there are potential risks. And when I came off, no, as I said, I mean, he recommended 6 weeks. I extended it to 12. I think that still was not even, I mean, in hindsight, it probably should have been a year to 2 years for me to get off. And I think maybe my experience might have been very different, but I think both tapers were way too fast. And in fact, I went back to him a couple of times and he basically said, I've never heard of anything like this. I've never, not aware of this. Anyone ever, I've heard about people having mild problems for a couple of weeks, but I've never heard of anything like this. So
Mhm.
my sense is that either the level of denial or the level of ignorance was very, very sad, but I think pretty common.
Yeah. Yeah. You hear that all
Psychiatrists.
the time in the withdrawal support groups online. People say, that's what my doctor said. You must be rare. I've never seen this before. Or, worse, they're told that it's not possible.
Right,
It's not
right,
possible for that to happen.
right.
So you're in this severe state. You went back to the doctor. He's telling you he's really never seen it before. And I'm wondering then the next part of your story is that you get put on a benzodiazepine.
Yeah,
Do
I
you?
went back to him. I mean, I still had faith in him. That was misguided, but I
Mhm.
couldn't sleep. I mean, Nicole, when you sleep 2 hours a night or maybe three, and I was somebody who used to sleep 6, 7, and sometimes on weekends I would, splurge and sleep 8, 9 hours. And you're trying to sleep 2.5 hours and waking up in brutal agony because the early morning hours, as you probably are
Oh, I know.
for sure, but
It's
for most
torture.
people, the early morning hours are the worst. I mean, that's absolutely the worst part of the day. So you're up 4 hours or 5 hours before your family. You're in agony,
Yeah.
and you think, I just want to sleep. And so I went back to him, and he's like, "Oh, try this." I didn't. If you'd asked me what's a benzodiazepine, I wouldn't have the foggiest idea. He prescribed me something called temazepam,
Mhm.
and I took it, and I think in the short term it helped a little bit. I don't think it helped a lot, but I think I did sleep a little bit more for a while. Um, and then, again, thank God for my wife. She ended up going on the internet again and saying, Peter, I've done some research. These are not good drugs, and they're not drugs that you should be on for any period of time.
Mhm.
Problem was, she didn't. I mean, I'm not blaming her. I'm very grateful, but probably I'd already been on them for 8 weeks at that point. So I probably already developed temazepam dependence.
Mhm.
And at that point, I realized I don't trust this psychiatrist. And I think at that point, I know what happened. I was talking to a friend, and my friend said, "Oh my God, I have a friend who had a horrible experience with the benzodiazepine. You should talk to her." So I ended up talking to this other person, and she said, "Oh, I know a doctor who I think is pretty knowledgeable about the harms and risks that comes from benzodiazepines. Why don't you confer with him?" And I did. And I think I got much better advice from him than my first psychiatrist. I think he still probably pushed me to get off maybe a little faster than I might have. But his theory was, you've only been on 2 months. He said, we could do he at least knew the lingo. And he said, you could do a liquid microtaper, but you might still be on for another 2 years. And you've only been on for 8 weeks. My thinking is, I'd rather get you off as fast as we can safely do it. I don't really want you to be on these drugs for 2 years when you've only been on them for 8 weeks. So we kind of set up a system where we kind of set up a taper schedule. He said, I want you to check in with me every morning and
Mhm.
tell me about like sleep and mood and whatever. And I'm going to help guide you. And I'm not going to let you go too fast, but I am going to push you a little because I think you'd be better off getting off sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
At least it was someone who he wasn't ignorant. I don't know if that was the right call. I'll never know. I mean, you can't know. But it made sense to me. And that's what we did. And so we kind of followed the Ashton manual I mean,
Mhm.
oh, well, we did switch over immediately. I didn't do a long switch over to Valium. I just switched over to Valium and to a Valium, the equivalent of temazepam dosage, and then basically did a sort of Ashton manual approach, which I know some people say is too, everyone reveres Heather Ashton as they should. Some people think her sort of schedules, even though she very clearly said you should tailor it to yourself. Some people think her schedules are too fast, but basically I follow a Ashton manual schedule to get off
Mhm.
Valium. And I think that the major damage that was done to me was the antidepressant withdrawal. But through Valium withdrawal, I developed a couple of physical symptoms I still haven't gotten rid of. I developed horrific burning nerve pain.
Yeah.
Um, and I know with 100% certainty it's from Valium withdrawal because A, I've never had it in my life before. And B, it started not after my first cut. It started after my second Valium cut. And I suddenly started waking up with this just feeling like I was on fire. The best analogy I can think of is as if someone cut little thin lines under my skin and put wires underneath my skin. And I would wake up at 3 a.m. and my chest would be on fire, my back would be on fire. I was going and taking freezing cold showers at 3 a.m. to try to cool myself. It doesn't really work. It's really just a distraction. It's like another sensation to distract you from the horrors of the burning nerve pain. I still have burning nerve pain. It's so much less severe. But it took me, I think, about 3 months to get off Valium.
Mhm.
I was actually on quite a low dosage. I think I was on 15 milligrams of temazepam, and that's the 7.5 is most people think the Valium equivalent is about 7.5 milligrams of Valium. So I got off that in about 3 months, probably a little fast, but I don't think it was crazy fast. But
Yeah.
that was 4 years ago, last month, and I still have burning nerve pain to this day. But as I said, I'm so grateful that it is so much less than it was before, but I still have burning nerve pain now.
Yeah, that burning nerve pain with benzos is so, so common. I have it. I know so many other people who were exposed to benzodiazepines who have it, and it's awful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, and I just basically, I mean, I think we can talk about if you want to sort of do this more at the end, but my feeling about I would not say to somebody, never take an antidepressant. I
Mhm.
think that there may be reasons why someone could do it. And I think there are a lot of cautions, I would say. I would say with benzodiazepines, I would say don't ever touch them. I think they're drugs that are awful and should never be prescribed. Except maybe they say they give them in hospitals right before surgery to people to calm them. And maybe if you take a single dose so that you're not a complete basket case when you go into surgery, maybe that makes sense. But I
Yeah.
think any use of benzodiazepine other than a one-off like that, I just think there is no reason for those drugs to exist except to make money for pharmaceutical companies. I think they are dangerous and awful drugs.
Yeah. I'm wondering about the second psychiatrist, the one who knew about microtapering and was sort of speaking the lingo. Did he validate your antidepressant withdrawal? Did he understand that that was a real thing you were experiencing?
Yes and no. He absolutely did, but I think he had more faith when when my withdrawal lasted a pretty long time, and by that I mean a year, he started saying, well, I think maybe you should seriously consider, you may just have this, you just may have a natural inclination towards depression and you may need antidepressants. And I resist. I mean, there's this one voice and you're thinking, God, I feel so awful. Maybe I should. But I resisted and I resisted and I didn't agree with him. And I thought, you know what? I think I want to have this experience of feeling like I'm completely off and all the effects of withdrawal are gone. And
Mhm.
only then will I make a judgment whether I am just a depressed person. I'd like to
Yeah.
think I'm not, but I resist. I just felt like, no, I'm still in the midst of withdrawal and I'm not going to take an antidepressant to address that. Um,
Yeah.
so he
That's
was
common too.
savvy, but not quite. I don't think as savvy as maybe he might have been. I think he had too much faith in these drugs and not enough understanding of how bad withdrawal. He recognized withdrawal was a real thing. And he wasn't like the first guy who was like, oh gosh, a week. He realized it could be pretty bad. But I think when it got out to a year away, he started thinking, well, maybe you're just really depressed.
Yeah, the protracted nature. It's like sometimes you can get them to come with you so far on the journey, but then once you reach a point, they're like, it shouldn't go on that long, but
Exactly.
were you
Exactly.
were you finding people in the online support groups? Were you in there sort of digging around and researching, seeing that there were longer timelines so that you weren't this outlier?
Nicole, this last 4.5 years is such a sort of one light, it feels like it's forever. And another light, it feels like it's a blur. I can't remember exactly when I found things like Benzo Buddies, but Lynn actually connected me to Laura Delano.
Mhm.
And I did have a couple of conversations with Laura, and she certainly validated this can be very long. And she would say, no, you're dealing with withdrawal. This is what you're dealing with, and you don't let anyone tell you you're just massively depressed. This is withdrawal you're dealing with. And so that was very validating. And then I found Benzo Buddies, and there was a period of time where I would, the only thing I would do in the morning before I was still largely, except for a couple of short periods of disability, I continued to work. I don't know how I did it, but I did it. But I would go walk in the morning. I would walk my dog, and I would just have my face plastered to my phone reading Benzo Buddy success stories, just desperately hoping like, oh yeah, can I survive this? There are people who do. So, and I did make connections through online. I did find some Facebook groups, and I ended up connecting with a few people who I think really helped save my life. A couple of people who had both been through and come through and gotten to the other side. So
Mhm.
they could sort of say, you just hang in there. You will make this if you just hang in there. And you don't really believe them, but nonetheless, hearing them helps. And then I had a couple of people who were kind of in the shit with me.
Yeah.
And that combination was very helpful. The people who said, I've been there, I went through it, took me X number of years. It was awful, but I did make it. And life is actually really pretty great now. And then I also had the support, you have these people who you can kind of go through the misery together. And I think both a combination of those two things really were very, very helpful.
Yeah. So you would recommend support of that kind for somebody else who's in the trenches.
Oh, I wouldn't have survived.
Yeah.
Now, there's a sort of a counter to that, which is I also did try to say, don't spend your whole time on Benzo Buddies. Don't spend your whole day reading about antidepressant withdrawal. Don't spend all of your time talking to support people. Try to live your life.
Mhm.
So I do think you can get sucked into it to the place where you can't see anything else. I think it was important that I tried to maintain some kind of a life, even though I could never turn my mind off. My brain was always telling me, you're miserable, you're dying, this is agony, it's never going to end. So that voice was always in my head. It would almost never turn off. Even when I tried to do things I kept exercising. I was luckily physically able to keep exercising. I kept working. It was sort of a distraction, but even working, I would just find myself thinking these horrible thoughts. So I think support is great. And I would encourage people to find it, because I think it's wonderful not to feel like you're completely alone in hell. But I also would encourage people not to spend all their time focused. Even if your mind won't turn off, I think it's important that you not just spend all your time talking to your friends who are your benzo supporters.
Yeah. So besides, some people just become so ill they can't work or they can't exercise. But if you can, I think those are great tips to just sort of try to stay plugged in to the things that you were doing before if you can. But were there any other sort of coping mechanisms that you found useful in order to get through the days?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. I'm very disciplined. I was a competitive athlete for very many years, and I set up a routine. So here I am waking up and it depends. It gets better over the years, and my sleep is only now good or decent, I would say. It wasn't always 3 hours a night. It gradually kind of crept up to 4 and so on, very slowly over time. But I've got at minimum 3 hours in the morning in which my family's asleep. It's dark. And I'm in agony. I'm
Yeah.
not I don't want to write the great American novel. I could never write the great American, but I certainly don't have any kind of, people say, well, why don't you work? Like, I don't want to work. I feel like I want to die in the morning. But what I did do was a lot of different sort of coping. I tried tapping, I tried meditation, I tried something called yoga nidra. I meditation, deep breathing. And I eventually developed these rituals. They would vary a little bit over time, but I would fill those 3 hours with various things. And I think if anything, what they did two things. They were better than lying there and ruminating. Even if, again, my brain might be on fire with all these negative thoughts, but I still felt like I was doing something.
Mhm.
And so it was partly just helped me get through the darkest hours. The other thing was I felt like I was actively participating in my recovery. I do believe the kind of the mantra that a lot of people that you find on these internet sites say is like, it's really time. Ultimately, time is, but I also felt like, okay, I want to give my body every advantage it can have. So I thought if I can be meditating and it brings my level of anxiety down by 1%, maybe my body has a little bit more energy to heal because the anxiety is slightly less. Now, let me be clear. Meditating did not make me feel, I didn't feel Zen-like and wonderful and blissful, but I think it just helped a little bit. And I think the deep breathing helped a little bit and the slow, gentle yoga. So I think it helped a little bit. And I would at least tell myself, this might be helping speed your healing. But one thing I really learned was initially, somebody would say something like, oh, have you tried tapping? And initially I think, oh my God, this is going to be it. I'll tap and I'll feel good.
Yeah.
I had to lose that mindset because I quickly found, no, you're not going to feel good. It might make you feel slightly better. So I gave up for a long time. I was sort of caught up in this idea, if I can find the right thing, I'll just suddenly feel a lot better.
Yeah.
It was a healthy transformation when I realized, no, none of these things are going to make you feel great, but they might help a little bit. And as somebody who I really like is this woman, Jennifer Swan, does a lot of YouTube stuff.
Mhm.
And she said, if nothing else, this is an investment in the future. When you heal, you'll have all these wonderful habits like meditation that will help you for the rest of your life. So if nothing else, you're doing something that may not pay off right away, but it will pay off in the future. But
Yeah.
my instinct is that maybe all of this calming stuff I did maybe accelerated my healing a tiny bit because it put my body in a better place to allow the natural healing functions to progress. But I'll never know for sure, Nicole. We'll never really know. Does meditation help?
Yeah. I always say, because I was doing all these things too, these, yogas and ASMR and putting my legs up the wall and breathing with my belly and in through my nose and all these things, And I had the same experience for you, like maybe brings things down a little notch only for the time where I was actually doing it.
Right.
But it was like, I always just sort of had the looking back regret. Like if I would have done these things in the first place, I'm forced to do them now in order to cope and stay alive with this horrible suffering. But if I would have known about them before I took medication, I just wonder, maybe I wouldn't have ever had to go down this path in the first place. So I'm just wondering, like, before you accepted that prescription and you were having this moderate sort of depression in your life, did you try other things? Were you aware of other things, or did you just?
Yeah, I did therapy.
Yeah.
And therapy helped. Um, in hindsight, I probably would never have taken the medication. Or what I would have done was said I was in a dark period. I wish a doctor had said, okay, we're going to do this. You're going to do it for 6 months. And we're going to work really intensively on therapy. And then I'm going to take you off gradually because I see this as something to help you through a rough patch, not a lifetime prescription. I mean, that's maybe what I would have done, or maybe I wouldn't have done it at all. But I did do I wasn't clueless. I wasn't drinking like a fish and doing really stupid things that can help exacerbate depression.
Right.
I did try to take care of myself and I did do therapy, but I was still I do think that there are some people who, whether it's their genetics, I'm not going to say their level of serotonin, but some biological thing that we don't really fully understand yet, or something about the way you were brought up. I mean, I wasn't brought up in the world's most joyous household. My mother, I think, was depressed most of my childhood. And I think that has an effect about the way a child's going to feel about the world. So
Yeah.
I don't think I wasn't just lazy. Oh, boy, I would like to take a pill so I feel suddenly great. I was dealing with some real stuff in my life that was hard.
Yeah.
But given the cost of these antidepressants, I probably, in hindsight, never would have taken them.
Yeah. Maybe especially if you would have been given the informed consent, ahead of time.
Well, absolutely. If somebody had said, you can take this for a number of years and it may help you a little bit, but you're going to go through 4.5 years of hell. No, I would not have taken that trade-off.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
the one other thing I'll never know, Nicole, is if I tapered over the course of a year off of it, let's say off of Effexor for a year, would it have been anything like this? I don't know. My instinct is it wouldn't have been nearly this bad,
yeah.
but I'll never know that for certain.
Yeah. But there are people in the groups, I'm sure you've encountered them that are tapering and they're having a horrible time. They're really struggling. It may not be to the level of people who rapidly came off, but it still doesn't sound like something enjoyable, and it goes on for so long. A lot of people, like you said, if you would have done your taper properly, it could have been a year or two. And then you're just each cut, some of them describe feeling horrible and then having to wait for it to sort of stabilize. And then you have to put yourself through another one. So yeah, you're right though. You don't have any way to know if you would have done it properly, what it would have,
Yeah.
what it would have felt like.
Actually, there's one other thing I should probably add that I got off in June, the beginning of June of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And, as I said, I crashed and horrific insomnia. It got so bad in August, I thought, I can't bear this. I don't think I'm going to survive. And I I was actually consulting at that point with a different doctor, not the original prescriber. And he said, you could try reinstating at a lower dose and we could try to taper you off much more slowly and see what happens. But he said it's kind of a gamble because you're a couple months out. You're not reinstating after a week. But he said maybe it'll work. So I went back to, like, I think the lowest dosage, 18.75 of Effexor
Mm-hmm.
for about 4 days. And it was as if my body was rejecting the drug. On the 4th day, I felt violently ill. My jaw felt like it would lock shut. I was sweating profusely. And I thought, whatever this drug was initially, it has now become poison to me.
Yeah.
And so trying to reinstate, I know some people are successful in that, or they reinstate at a lower dosage and then they taper off more slowly. It did not work for me. It was a complete disaster. And so I never touched, I didn't ever try to reinstate again.
Yeah. Did you feel at that point any more desperate though? Because then like this option of giving up or going back on is sort of off the table.
No, you're right. I mean, you were faced, I sort of had forgotten about this, but yeah, you kind of realize there's no way out but forward. Like
Mhm.
I just have to keep going without and just hope that eventually my body comes out of this.
Yeah.
So.
So your wife sounds amazing as far as, she was sort of there and researching things and kind of, she was thinking all the right things anyways. I mean, I know a lot of people in this like are being gaslit by their families or their families are just so tired of dealing with them. They're like, just go back on the drug, I'm wondering, since this was a protracted thing for you many years, how did your relationship sustain? How did your work sustain, your friendships, like that aspect of your life?
Well, it's hard. My wife is incredible, and I'm so lucky that she's stuck it out with me.
Yeah.
But there were times, she was I think, felt married to a different person than the person she'd gotten married to. I mean, she knew that I was not, I've never been the sort of party, but I'm not the most ebullient person in the world, but I was in just a very deep black place for 4.5 years. 3.5 years, I think I started to come out of it a little bit. And then
Mhm.
it's really accelerated in the last few months in an incredible way. But it's hard on even the best of relationships to suddenly think, like, who is this person? And why can't we do anything anymore? And why can he not smile? And why does it feel like I'm with a black cloud all the time? It was very hard on our marriage. I'm thrilled I survived, that we survived. And
Mhm.
I'm very, very grateful to her. But no, it's not easy on even the best of relationships. Um, it was hard to stay connected. And I think some people don't really believe it. Luckily, I think most of my friends were really pretty supportive. And even if they may have thought, "God, this just sounds so weird," they didn't just sort of, I didn't get a lot of, snap out of it. Or, I didn't get much. I got some of it, but not a lot of it. Frankly, the worst a lot of the time was the doctors. I mean, I consulted with it's weird with psychiatry because at one level you would think I should never trust any psychiatrists. But I want to believe that, and I do believe that there are actually some pretty great people who are in that field. I think there are a lot of people who aren't very great, and they're arrogant and they're ignorant about what the risks of what they do. But I consulted with some, and I mean, there's one in particular. She was considered a leading researcher. Somebody I met somebody at a dinner, and they said, "Oh my God, your situation sounds horrible." And I did a news story about the advances in ECT. Shock therapy is commonly known, and it's very different from what it was back in the old days. It's not this primitive, brutal thing. You should talk to this person. And I thought, I don't think I'm going to do ECT. Um, in fact, I think Belissa did it, and it was like a disaster. But I thought, I'll talk to anybody. I'm desperate. So I talked to this person, and she was a leading researcher in the field, and I'm grateful that she gave the time, but it was an awful experience because I told her what was going on with me, and she was like, "Well, yeah, you've just regressed to your old level of depression."
Mhm.
I said, well, wait a minute here. When I used to be depressed, I was, doing high level academic programs and getting through them. And now I can barely get out of bed. It's like, yeah, well, sometimes depression just gets worse as you get older. And I said, well, but I never had, what does burning nerve pain have to do with depression? That's not something that comes from depression. She just wouldn't answer. It was like
Yeah.
she couldn't compute that, even though she didn't really medicate people, she was a researcher in ECT, but she couldn't compute that these drugs could have done this to somebody. She could only put it in the framework of, oh yeah, you're just depressed. That's your natural state. And that was a horrible experience because you're thinking, is she right? This is
Yeah.
supposedly a top person in the field of psychiatry. And that's what I got. And that she was not the only one. I got that from people. And it's awful.
Well, and when they say they've never seen this before, it kind of, I think, well, that's why, because we stop going eventually, because we know that's mostly what we're going to get. And it's kind of pointless, right? To just be gaslit or disbelieved every time you go and pay a $45 copay. It's like taking your money and just throwing it in the garbage because,
Right.
there's most people just give up and work on acceptance and start doing all the things that we talked about, like calming your body down and just waiting and giving it time.
Yeah.
I wonder with your wife, did you ever ask her, due to the time sequence that you were a protracted case, did she ever start to worry that you were kind of like just stuck like this?
Yeah, I'm sure she did.
Yeah.
I have no doubt. Um, that
Yeah.
she would wonder, think, is this ever going to end? Is this
Yeah.
what if I stay in this relationship, is this what I have to look forward to? But
Yeah.
again, I'm just really grateful that we're still together. And it's so nice to be able to do some things with her now. As I said, I mean, literally, I think a year ago, I started seeing little glimmers, but still a lot of very, very dark stuff. And it's
Yeah.
really the last 3 months that it's just the improvement has sped up tremendously. I'm
Mhm.
sleeping more. I did a graph of my sleep. I kept sleep logs on and off for, and back in 2019, I didn't have them going back to 2018, but I remember I was sleeping 2.5 and 3 hours a night. By 2019, I was probably sleeping 4 on average. And then it slowly over the years in between I did the graphing in late 2022 and is up to about 5.5 hours. And now it's about 6 hours and 15 minutes. And it's just a slow upward trend. And I don't wake up every morning thinking I want to die, which
Yeah.
was basically the way I woke up for 4 years.
Yeah. So this is just recently you've really started, feeling like there's hope and that your trajectory has, moved in the right direction. Can you explain sort of like what it feels like? Is it like a sudden thing? Was it just, you know, yeah,
One
give
of
us
the
more of the good stuff, I guess. Yeah.
one of the people I became connected with was a guy I saw his YouTube video, and he healed overnight. And I
Wow.
believe his story. He literally woke up one morning and it was gone after he'd been in Benzo hell for about 2.5 years. It's not that. I always hoped that it would be that.
Yeah. I think we
But
all do.
yeah,
Right.
but no, I think it's more. First of all, a lot of people would tell me I seem different. And I would think, what are you talking about? I don't feel different. But I've heard that even depression, whether it's from psychiatric drug withdrawal or otherwise, that it's oftentimes other people's perceptions is like a leading indicator. They see changes that you can't feel. But
Yeah.
people say, oh, you seem more alive and you seem more vibrant or whatever. But I started gaining weight. I'd lost a tremendous amount of weight. I looked like a skeleton back in 2019. I lost about 25 pounds.
Wow.
So I started gaining weight. I started sleeping more. I was able to start taking really nice naps. I used to take toxic naps. I'd fall asleep and 5 minutes later, I'd wake up just buzzing and feeling horrible. So you
Yeah.
didn't nap, but then I started to be able to get like 30-minute naps, which were really nice. They supplemented my nighttime sleep. Um, I just had a little bit more interest in things. I started to have a better concentration. I suffered terrible cognitive decline. I could not, my brain just didn't function very well. It's still not all the way there, but I'm finding that I'm better at work. I'm sharper at work. So it's just a lot of different things. But I think the biggest thing is just noticing that you wake up having slept half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour more, and your first thought isn't that I want to die. It's, oh, wow, this doesn't feel so bad to wake up anymore. It's kind of okay. And I think about, well, what am I going to do today as opposed to how am I going to survive today? Which
Right.
was what the biggest feeling was. And there was one other, I had a one symptom that was really, I called it psychotic thoughts. It wasn't thinking about slaughtering people or whatever. I would wake up and I feel like my brain was fractured into multiple pieces. And I would literally imagine there were sort of all these different pieces of my brain.
Mhm.
And it would take about an hour and I'd feel like they would eventually coalesce into back to one brain. I didn't wake up every morning with this, but it was scary. I literally felt like my brain was fractured. And I noticed about 6 months ago, hadn't happened in a long time, and it doesn't happen anymore. So I
Wow.
didn't wake up with psychotic thoughts. I didn't wake up with suicidal ideation. I was sleeping more, and I've become more interested in things that I used to care about and had sort of lost interest in. I'm now back interested in them again.
Yeah. With your cognitive function, and I'm curious about memory too. Did you have memory loss?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I qualified to be on Jeopardy. I never got called to be on the program, but I had that kind of a mind. I just remembered stuff. My
Yeah.
memory was awful. I've regained some of it. I haven't regained all of it, but it's
Mhm.
better.
What about like long-term memory? Do you feel like some of your life was sort of a blur, or that you couldn't remember being a part of it, or was it more like your short term was
It was both.
affected?
It was
Both.
both. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
the other
some,
thing to go along, I mean, this isn't quite memory, but I would think back to my past and think that was all just pointless and worthless. I've never done anything that's worth anything in life.
yeah.
And I felt like my whole life was just a complete failure. And I
Mhm.
don't really feel, I mean, I have my regrets and I think there are things I wish I'd done but didn't do. But I don't now wake up in the morning and think my life is a complete failure.
Yeah. So you mentioned about obviously in hindsight, I think that's a big word for people who go through this. We all have like, in hindsight, I would have, in hindsight, you learn so many things in this just way too late, unfortunately, unless you're super lucky. Um, but besides, tapering more slowly, is there anything in hindsight you would have done differently if you could do it all over again?
Well, yeah, never would have taken the benzo. Um, but I just feel like I can't go back and imagine rewinding. I was in a particular place at the time. I think people were far less aware of the risks of antidepressants. I don't really think to myself, I mean, I made that decision.
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, it would have been tapering much, much more slowly. It would have been also trying to get off instead of staying on for 22 years, at which point I think the brain had just, my central nervous system been completely altered by this.
Yeah.
I think I would have tried to get off after a couple of years. And I think maybe if I'd had better advice about do this super slowly, I might have actually gotten off Effexor after 2 or 3 years and not felt a need to get back on it. Those are probably my greatest regrets.
Yeah.
But in a weird way, no, I hate the fact that these 4.5 years have been the way they have, but I think I'm starting to get a little bit of what Jennifer Lee sometimes talks about, which is maybe it was not that I want it for anybody or even myself, but maybe some good things will come of this. I
Yeah.
do have a level of gratitude that already, even though I wish my burning nerve pain was gone. I don't feel 100%. I feel probably about 85%. But there are moments when I'll just think, oh my God, I survived that. And actually, maybe there's more to this. It's actually better than I thought. When you've been in hell, you can kind of appreciate not hell, maybe
Yeah.
more than you did if you hadn't, they say to truly feel joy, sometimes you have to suffer.
Yeah.
Uh, you don't wish suffering on people, but I actually think that maybe there's some truth to that.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, I've heard people say they were grateful for the experience. I don't think you're ever going to find me go there. I'll never be grateful for this, but I can see definitely that you can learn great things and it can change and transform you even while you're still going through it. I've noticed differences about myself and things that I never would have probably come across had I never had gone through this. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a weird thing. You're right. No, do I really, would I say, oh no, give me that 4.5 years again? No, absolutely not. But
Yeah.
I want to try to stay focused on the fact that I want to try to learn something from it. And I do want to say, Peter, this is real. You went through hell and look at what life is. I mean, and you're not in that anymore. And so this is actually kind of sweet. It's
Yeah.
awful as the world, the horrible things going on in the world, but there's some pretty wonderful stuff. And I think I have a greater appreciation for other people. I have true gratitude for the people. This is a very generous community.
Mhm.
The people who literally just will take a cold call from you and you say, I'm just suffering. And I know you went through what I went through, and they'll just talk to you. That's really lovely. The
Yeah.
people, I mean, you did that for me, Nicole. You didn't know me from Adam. We had a mutual friend, but other than that, it's like, and I reached out to you when I was in some really dark days, and you were kind and sent me thoughtful responses to my emails. And that's just a very wonderful thing to do for somebody you don't even know.
Yeah. And I think people do it because I mean, it's this club that we're in that nobody wants the secret handshake to, but we all have it.
Yeah.
We know how bad it is and how desperate it can be. And we're the only ones who can speak that language. I mean, you can't go to someone who's never had this and get the type of support you're going to get from the people who are living it or who survived it. So we have to show up for each other. We're all we have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the time and we're about at an hour, and I just want to give you a chance for any closing thoughts or if you have advice for anybody, anything like that we haven't touched on that you wanted to share.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I had any two pieces of advice, I'd say one, do find support, find people. And as I said, I think my combination of somebody who can sort of walk with you who is in it with you, and then find some people who've been through it, whether it's, if you need to go to a coach, or also you can, and I did that. But I also found people who just do it on an amateur basis, as it were. They will just, this guy in the Midwest whose YouTube video I saw, he's probably got 50 people he talks to around the world. And he just does it out of the goodness of his heart. And he will take time. And, we just would trade WhatsApp voice messages or occasionally talk on the phone. I think that support is really, really vital. I don't know how you do. I think it's very hard to do this alone. And the other thing is, when you're in it, the reassurance, you don't believe it for about more than 3 seconds. I still think you should keep trying to get it. Like, believe me when I say you will heal. And even if that lasts for 5 seconds, I did not believe 6 months ago that I would be in the place I am now. It's still not fully where I want to be, but it's just so much better. And I thought after, 4 years of this, I really, just thought, I'm not going to survive. This is never going to get better.
Yeah.
It does. It does get better.
Yeah. That's a perfect ending. I think there's probably plenty of people tuning in and listening, self included, who needs to hear that message, and we need to hear it over and over and over again. So thanks so much, Peter, for joining us and for being willing to share your story. I think the more people who share just openly about this, the more we can get the message out, and people truly can sort of have better informed consent. Like, this is a possibility that you may face if you take these medications. And so do your own research and be your own best health advocate, and just be fully informed when making the decisions about these drugs,
Absolutely. One more thing, I would really like to, it's not so much about psychiatric drug withdrawal, but for those whose symptoms is deep depression.
Mhm.
William Styron, the great American novelist, wrote a book about his own depression called Darkness Visible.
Mhm.
Tearing up because I read it multiple times while this, and it really moved me. It's a beautiful book. It's only about 90 pages long. And the last page is one of the most beautiful and hopeful things you'll ever read. So
Yeah.
I would say, if you don't know the book, get it, read it. It's truly inspirational.
Okay. Yeah, I think you sent me a quote from it that I found very profound. So we'll link to it in the description of the video for anybody who wants to find it.
It's a worthwhile read.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for this live discussion. If you have not seen Medicating Normal yet, you can go to our website at medicatingnormal.com/watch for the many ways that you can view it. Check our events tab on Facebook for more scheduled upcoming interviews like this one. And if you want to support the film's outreach efforts with a donation, you can do so at medicatingnormal.com/donate. Thanks again, Peter, and thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will see you soon. Take care.
Thanks, Nicole.
Bye.